So I saw an interview with Canelo, and there was some great insight, and I want to give the boxing philosophy perspective. So let's open that door. I'm going to explore 11 ideas. So the first idea is that Canelo says he wasn't ready when he fought Floyd Mayweather. He wasn't ready. And that he's actually grateful that he lost. At 23 at the time, he beat everyone in Mexico, came to the US, and took Floyd. And he said, maybe it wasn't at the right time, but who cares? So what do I make of this? Well, I think the first thing to recognize here is that Canelo has the fighter's mindset, in the sense that it's not just about the money. He wants to fight the best. Floyd at that time was a technical master, an absolute technical master, a defensive genius. Canelo's youth and perhaps his great confidence, maybe it was overconfidence, and it seemed to have backfired in that fight. He tried to fight an intelligent fight. Think of this, fighting intelligently against the most intelligent boxer backfired. Floyd's counterpunching, it controlled the range, it controlled the distance. And I think in that fight, Canelo needed to accelerate the pace, but for whatever reason, he did not. It was a massive risk. It was a tremendous risk. But it's important to remember that great boxers take risks. So the next idea is that the most honest thing he says about Crawford, even when you do everything correct, the things sometimes don't go your way. So effectively what Canelo is doing, he's admitting he forgot bases and was mentally not there. The loss wasn't physical, it was mental. To me, when he says that it was mental, what does that mean? Is Canelo taking full accountability? I feel like in that fight, what was needed was that Canelo needed to get into the pocket and he needed to get vicious. He needed to do that intelligent body punching that he does. And his most typical combination is the right uppercut to the head and that left hook to the body, which is actually really hard to land when someone is in a southpaw position. And Crawford maintained the southpaw position for the majority of that fight. I believe that Crawford's physical strength surprised him. That wasn't the only thing, but it definitely was a surprising factor. And I think that the timing of Crawford, which is elite, I think surprised him as well. And I think he probably didn't duplicate that in camp in preparation because he didn't expect that level. The southpaw angle, of course, gave Canelo a bigger puzzle to solve. It was a different puzzle. He did try, if my recollection serves me correct, he tried the acceleration in round 9. He tried to grab the bull by the horn, so to speak. But Crawford responded. He didn't just respond, he responded effectively. There's some questions to consider here. Did Canelo underestimate Crawford? Did Canelo have a poor camp? Or is Crawford just an elite boxer? Or can all of those things be true at the same time? That definitely was a defining moment for Crawford, but it also said a lot about Canelo's mindset, willing to fight anyone. The next idea is that Canelo stated that they need a little bit more from me. This line, I believe, refers to Canelo explaining the entire business of boxing. He was offered, allegedly, 75 plus million for a Crawford rematch, but he says the negotiation point, it starts at 100 million. That's incredible. I guess when you're an elite brand, you can create a new ceiling. Why is Canelo such a massive draw? How is he such a big draw? Well, think of this. If you look at the context of when Canelo fought Triple G in the first fight, that attracted 30.5 million Mexican viewers. And when Canelo took on Daniel Jacobs, that attracted 30.1 million or 30 million Mexican viewers also. These are astronomical numbers. And as we know, and I think Netflix took this as a whole, but when Canelo fought Crawford, there was 41.4 million watching on Netflix. I guess the thing here is that big brands have big numbers. That's objective truth. Think of it the other way. Can a big brand have small numbers? Canelo is a huge part of the boxing algorithm. Some may say he was or is still the boxing algorithm. Considering Canelo's value, considering the value and contextualizing the value, contextualizing the numbers, 100 million may not seem that unreasonable. Canelo shows us what can happen when you reach the top of the ladder. In short, in capitalism, the 1% can basically take the whole pie. They can have the majority of the pie to themselves. Canelo, undeniably, is the 1% in the boxing hierarchy. And then the next idea is that if I was still going to fight, I need to be there mentally. The mind is where the body follows. That's not a training observation, it's more of a philosophy. Canelo needs to be optimal. He definitely needs to be optimal. And to be optimal, you need to have an optimal boxing environment. He needs boxing to fuel that purpose. He needs that purpose. Maybe he should look in the mirror and ask himself, can he rediscover the hunger of his youth? If the answer, and in most cases that answer may be ambiguous, but if the answer is a categorical no, then what should he do? Maybe the transition is pure business, or maybe the transition is pure family, or maybe the transition is a combination of both. This may be a new door to open. And boxers should consider what doors to open, because sometimes, and I think this is a good point, it's a figurative point, but a good point, but sometimes the door that you open in your 20s and sometimes the door that you open in your 30s is different to the door that you open in your 40s. So it's really important to look at your destination and see where that door is and then open it accordingly. And then the next idea is that Canelo doesn't think he's a Mexican fighter carrying a nation's weight. He thinks he's just doing a job he loves. And, you know, being a Mexican fighter, it carries a history. When I think of Mexican fighting, I think of viciousness. I think of that brutality. I think of body punching. I think of passion. These fighters are passion. They got heart. They got courage. And it's a beautiful history, a history to admire. And when you talk about the top 5 great Mexicans of all time, I don't have a list, but of course you got to put Julius Cesar Chavez in there. I mean, his body punching was ruthless. Salvador Sanchez, of course, Canelo Alvarez, Ricardo Finito Lopez, Juan Manuel Marquez. I mean, these are great, great Mexican fighters. And like I said, I guess maybe the reason why Canelo's making that distinction between not carrying the weight of having to carry that legacy is because it's such a hard weight to bear. So he's just looking at it. Obviously, I'm assuming he defines himself as a Mexican boxer and he's proud of being a Mexican boxer, but he just doesn't want to carry the legacy in the sense of he just wants to focus on the fight, prepare for the fight, and win the fight. And that's understandable because pressure can hinder you psychologically. Pressure can hinder preparation. Pressure can hinder sparring. So I think this is more about a perspective thing for Canelo, if that makes sense. And then the next idea is that the fragile younger generation take. And is this the strongest signal of his worldview? This generation, according to him, is more fragile. You need to show them how to earn things. It's an interesting point. A lot of people have that point. Is this premise true as a general statement? First, how do we define strong? Is it mentally strong? Is it physically strong? Psychologically strong? Is it all of those things, etc.? And perhaps the strongest people of this generation are not on the internet. And I think what's important here is that maybe the premise of people were stronger back then, and when we say back then, what do we mean? Because human history is a long time. It's looking at the environments, because environments are part of creating people. So if you have this particular environment, you can get this particular outcome. But then if you have a different type of environment, then you get a different type of outcome. And I guess that you could assert that someone who is tough, who is extremely mentally tough, may have come from a very extreme circumstance, which then leaves the question, do those circumstances exist? And clearly, I think those circumstances do exist, but Do they exist in the same mass, in the same majority? I'm not sure. The world is forever changing. If you look at the British context, there's a struggling economy, you could argue. There's inflation. There are certain issues. And when you live in that type of political environment, it can change people psychologically. The notion is that it can make people tougher. However, even if the example is true, and even if the premise is true, we can clearly give examples of strong human beings today. David Goggins, from the outside looking in, I don't know him personally, but from what is portrayed and from the anecdotal evidence and what's portrayed on the internet, he seems like a very, very strong individual. Extremely strong. If it's 1 to 100, he seems to be on that scale of 100. Alex Hormozy seems to be a mentally very strong person, but for different reasons. Even though he does do fitness, his mental strength seems to come from, again, allegedly being able to do 12, 16-hour days of complete productivity. It's also important here to distinguish the person from the marketing. And sometimes it's hard to know which is the objective truth. But if we accept the premise, if we accept the marketing, that's two strong individuals in different ways. But even if we look at boxing, Usyk, very, very mentally tough individual, fighting for his people and has fought through a variety of crises in the ring. And then you have Tyson Fury, who showed immense courage when he got up against Deontay Wilder. How he got up was unbelievable stuff. That was like pure cinema. And AJ recently against Prenga shown incredible toughness. And he's shown toughness before. Check out that Klitschko fight. So there are clear mentally strong people or strong people today. But I think that Canelo, when he says that, he's saying something that a lot of other people are saying. And therefore it's important to kind of engage with this dialogue. Where does it come from? I think a lot of it is due to environment. I think a lot of things are due to environment. I think a lot of strong people are born in very tough environments. So that's the question, isn't it? The question is why. You look at Rocky Marciano. I think when you ask the question, maybe the bravest boxers in the world, I can think of two names, Rocky Marciano and Evander Holyfield. And what created those type of warriors? Probably the environment. Rocky Marciano, I don't know too much about his childhood, but I know that his preparation was vicious. Apparently he had these massive punch bags. Like his punch bags were bigger than any other contemporary heavyweight punch bags. So he had like specially designed punch bags, and he would have torturous training. And that would be part of his psychological toughness. Evander Holyfield at the time was seen as the best conditioned heavyweight ever at the time. And that was part of his psychological toughness. And you can see when they went through difficult moments in the ring, they were able to cope. They were able to handle a crisis. And perhaps that comes from the strong environments that they came from, whether it's upbringing or whether it's what they put themselves through in preparation for fights. It's a very interesting observation. And then the next idea is that Canelo says, I don't have what I have, but I don't need anything of this. I was happy. And I think what he's saying here is that he says he was happy as a kid. And when he was a kid, he was selling ice cream on buses. And that his father never showed him the hard times, which I'm assuming was objectively, he was in a hard situation. It's interesting here, really interesting situation here, that from one sense, the money does not define him. So money is not important. But then you say, well, if money is not important, his starting point for a rematch with Crawford is 100 million. But let me counter with that, because maybe both realities can be true. Maybe you can be a hard negotiator saying that this is my worth, it's 100 million, but at the same time, the money doesn't define you and the money doesn't change you. Because as I always say, or I've said various times, I don't think all money is good money. But of course, in capitalism, money can solve big problems. It can solve problems, but it can also create new problems. For a reference point, look at lottery winners. You could say the winner's tax. There's anecdotal information about people winning large sums of money, but then going into either depression or either losing all their money and then going into a real sad part of their life. So money doesn't necessarily solve all your problems. And perhaps the lesson here is that when your happiness is not tied to money, that's actually a good place to be mentally. And a lot of boxers struggle, even the 1% boxers. And remember, in boxing, in the hierarchy of boxing, the 1% make the majority of the money, which is different to the UFC model. But even the 1% of boxers, they seem to struggle the most, because the more money you have, the more you have to lose. I guess the higher the mountain, the bigger the drop. And then the next idea is that at 36, he's gone back to college, not for a degree, but for a business vocabulary. I need other vocabulary, a business vocabulary, because that's the transition he's engineering. I love the pursuit of knowledge, so this sounds amazing. And the context here is absolutely brilliant. Pursuing further knowledge after becoming rich. So it's a pure pursuit for knowledge. And to pursue business is really brilliant. I mean, capitalism is a jungle, and education is part of understanding that jungle. There's many different layers to capitalism, many different layers to starting a business. Important question, though, is who is teaching you business? Because not all teachers are the same. Some are better than others. Some may have the theoretical understanding, while others may have the practical understanding, and ideally, some may have a combination of both of those worlds. And I guess the answer to that question in terms of who is teaching you will validate the efficiency of that education. So hopefully he's got some good people around him. And I wonder, where is he going to take that business vocabulary? Does that business vocabulary continue with boxing? Is he going to do some more boxing business? Or is he going to do other businesses? Or is he going to do a combination of both? He clearly has the capital to do a lot. So if he combines the knowledge with the capital and has some good investors behind him, it'll be very interesting to see the business journey of Canelo. And then the next idea is that life will reward you the same effort you put into it. If you want to be the best, but you're sitting there eating trash and doing nothing. This is an interesting observation here, because it spawns the question, how much of Canelo's dominance is talent and how much is it discipline? To my understanding, Canelo is a dedicated athlete. He's a dedicated athlete. And dedication in any field is so important. It's a vital ingredient. It's not the only ingredient, but it's a vital ingredient in being great. So think of this. Doing the same things every day is boring, but it's essential, particularly if you're operating at the high level. And remember, Canelo has operated at the elite level of boxing. And some people have great talent. They might have the speed, they might have the power, they might have the reflexes, but they don't have the discipline. They're not willing to do the runs every day. They're not willing to put in the graft every day. They're not willing to do the work when no one is watching. And those people inevitably fail, even though they might be more talented. That people that become champions or become great champions and people that become legends. Of course, to become legendary, you need an element of talent. You need to have some good genetics. But there is this whole thing of dedication, devotion, compassion, and just mastering your craft that is essential. I remember actually I read a book from Malcolm Gladwell. I think it was called Outliers, and it spoke about success. And when I read that book, I came to the conclusion, I don't know if the book came to that conclusion, but I came to that conclusion that success is multifaceted, in the sense that success comes in many forms. And that's a great book for anyone trying to understand success. And I guess from the lens from Canelo, success, part of success, a massive part of success, is about the effort, is about the consistency, is about the dedication. And then the next idea is the legacy answer. And again, Canelo is dismissive. As a fighter, my legacy is already there. I think it's very good. He's already decided he's done enough. Now, what I think here is that, and maybe Canelo hasn't put the pieces to the puzzle together, or maybe he sees it differently, but his legacy is continuing, but maybe his legacy is continuing in a different way. As he's building his business knowledge and as he's going on this business journey, the legacy it may not continue to be a boxing legacy. It may now evolve into being a different type of legacy. Of course, he may bring his new business knowledge into the boxing arena, but his legacy can still be continued through other things. And I think it's important to set a precedent to be an elite boxer, but show that when that door closes of being an elite boxer, if you can do something elite after that, then that's really something. And Canelo is remarkable to all of us. He's a success story in every way. And then the final idea is, Canelo states, if you want something, work for it. I need new shoes. I go sell ice cream on the buses. That's the origin story of the most disciplined fighter of his generation. And I think that's a good comment to end it on. So we're going to transition now into the final part, which is answering 8 questions. So question number 1, did Canelo's confidence against Mayweather stop him from making the fight ugly enough to win? I think it looks like to me that when I watched the fight many years ago, that Canelo came into that fight trying to use feints and counter-punch the counter-puncher. I understand the logic, but when that was not working, he needed to make a transition. And this is an important part of ring IQ and adjustability. He needed to turn the tables. He needed to roll the dice. And I think he needed to get in the pocket and really start to make it tough for Floyd Mayweather, similar to what Ricky Hatton did. And for whatever reason, he didn't do it. Clearly, Canelo's a brave person. And I think what probably happened here is that he prepared to fight one way. And when that didn't work, and when he tried to make the adjustments, he just didn't have that game plan in his pocket. So it wasn't something that he could execute because he planned to fight Floyd Mayweather a certain way. And with Floyd Mayweather, I think to beat him, you have to be multifaceted. You have to be able to adapt because he's downloading information all the time. Second question, when Canelo says he mentally wasn't there against Crawford, is that accountability, an excuse, or evidence he underestimated Crawford? I think a lot of people made a big thing out of the size difference. And maybe Canelo started to believe that. Mostly you believe your own hype, I think, if your team is believing the hype. So maybe he went into the preparation not understanding the magnitude or the eliteness of Crawford. So that's definitely maybe a part of it. And it's hard to train for Crawford because sometimes he'll fight a whole fight orthodox, sometimes he'll fight a whole fight southpaw, and sometimes he'll switch hit. So preparing for that type of fighter is exceptionally difficult. Also, similar to Mayweather, Crawford has this ability to adapt mid-fight. So from that sense, it was always going to be difficult. But I think the timing, and that's something that's hard to see on video, I think his timing was essential, and the way he was able to control the action. So I think there might have been, he obviously knew he was a good fighter, but may not have understood that he was an elite fighter. And maybe more importantly, his team didn't understand that he was an elite fighter. With regards to an excuse, I mean, if you're mentally not there, or maybe that, you're not as mentally as engaged as you should be, is that an excuse? It depends if that's what really happened. And is he saying that retrospectively, or is that something he feels retrospectively? And is that objectively true? I mean, if you mentally felt that you weren't there and that's true, then to me, it's not an excuse as long as you give the credit to the opponent. So to me, if you, like, say, for example, if you have an injury and you state, yes, I had an injury, but then you give your opponent credit, I think that there's an element of accountability. But you have to take accountability for having that injury. You went into the ring with that injury, knowing you had that injury. So if you only acknowledge the injury but don't acknowledge the performance of the opponent, I think that there's problems with accountability there. From what I can remember, in the post-fight, Canelo was very complimentary of Crawford's abilities and Crawford's execution. So I would like to say that if someone's acknowledged how good their opponent is or was, but also just gives a bit of context to what happens, then I'm not sure that he's not taking pure accountability unless he completely changes his story. Question number 3. If Canelo's brand generates enormous numbers, is 100 million demand actually unreasonable? I guess the question is, does he still command those numbers? And how do those numbers translate in terms of money? So clearly he's commanded numbers that have been exponential, and the Crawford fight, the numbers are still huge. So I guess for the investors that are putting that money up, they have to look and see that do they get a return on their investment. So you can make the argument that Canelo's worth 100 million. I'm sure you can put some figures together to justify that, especially when you've got a huge live gate, you've got huge sponsorship, huge licensing, so and a huge pay-per-view. You've got a huge demographic. But I guess, is it worth it to the investors? Only they can make that calculation. But considering the brand and the huge entity that is Canelo at this time, it actually doesn't seem as unreasonable as it appears to be initially. Question 4. Can Canelo rediscover the hunger of his 20s, or is it time to open a different door? The question to me would be, how can you rediscover the hunger of your 20s when your situation has changed? And to me, the only way that you can rediscover the hunger of when you were younger is if legacy is still important to you, or if you're driven by money, or preferably you're driven by both. So if we assume that legacy is not that important, and if the money is not as big a factor as it was, it's hard to imagine someone generating that type of hunger. However, with experience comes knowledge. So the question could be, can you not have that hunger, but be so optimal in preparation and in training that you can still operate at an elite level? The Crawford fight was hard to assess because he was fighting Crawford. So if he was fighting someone else, maybe he knocks them out. But in his next fight or next fights, we're going to be able to assess if he's still able to operate on that elite level. Question number 5. Is Canelo right that the younger generation is more fragile, or are we measuring strength differently? I think we may be measuring strength differently, but I think that there's a reoccurring consensus that the previous generation were more stronger. However, in what context are we talking about? Are we talking in the British context, the Mexican context, the American context, the global context? I mean, because it's such a generalized statement, and even if you shorten the statement and said, you know, people in London are not as strong as they used to be. I mean, there's millions upon millions of people in London. So even if you feel that that sentiment is true, it's hard to qualify that with any type of evidence. I guess the only thing you can do is look at environments. And if you believe in the premise that hard, tough environments create hard people, then you just need to look around you and see, well, are there still hard, tough environments? And if there are still hard, tough environments, then by default, there should still be hard, tough people. Also, and I'm not saying Canelo does this, but looking at the internet world and in defining that as the real world is a mistake, because the internet world, I think, and this is just an I think, I could be wrong, is mainly a distraction. It's a projection. It's showing people what you want to show them. It's not necessarily a reflection of a real reality. So I think even if it was true, it would be so difficult to qualify. But clearly there were strong people then, really tough, strong people then. But clearly there are really strong, tough people now. So it's hard to put a number on these things. But he's speaking a truth that resonates with lots of people. So it's an important discussion. Question number 6. Can money be extremely important in business while still being irrelevant to your happiness? Yeah, I think that clearly in capitalism, money is really important. But you could make an argument that when you get past food, clothing, and shelter, and when you're able to sustain a particular lifestyle, money can actually become problematic. but it depends on the variables. Like if you have a poor extended family, they might have financial expectations. They might expect for you to pay for everything, whether it be going out for dinner, whether it be paying for people's education, paying for private education, so you might have a family tax, and that might be the culture of where you come from. You might have friends that might have expectations that, okay, when we're going out, you're going to fit the bill. And the premise here is that no money is eternal. So managing and having boundaries while having a large amount of money is very difficult. Also, how do you distinguish who are your real friends? Because when you get money, people start to latch onto you because they're looking at you as someone that they can use as leverage. So it's when you come from a platform of having a lot of money, it's hard to ascertain whether these friendships are genuine or whether these friendships are fake, and that can affect you psychologically. Question number 7, what does Canelo going back to college at 36 teach us about the importance of continuing to learn? I think it's a beautiful thing. If you've achieved becoming a multi-millionaire, and then it's not going back to college, it's the seeking of education that's impressive. Because to get educated, you don't just get education from college. It's not the only place you can get education. You can get education from books. You can get education from videos. You can get education from people. You can get education from mentors. But the fact that, and the terminology he used was business vocabulary, the fact that he's looking to build his business vocabulary and the fact that he sees the value in it, I think is a beautiful thing. I think that's great. And I think that, I don't know what his motivations are. I'm assuming his motivations is that maybe he's looking to build like a business portfolio and he wants to understand that. And that's really smart, because if you're looking to build a business portfolio, whether you're looking to get into real estate or you're looking to build some other businesses that provide some services or sell products, blah, 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 the optimal thing would be to build your business vocabulary. Like I said, the main thing is trying to get quality people to learn from. And then finally, question 8, what mattered more to Canelo's success, natural talent or the discipline to keep doing the boring work? Probably a combination of both. Canelo is clearly very talented as well, but he's also a dedicated athlete. If you take away any of those elements, you don't get the elite boxer. So they're both, they're both important. However, you could argue that we're given talent, but you're not given discipline. You're not given consistency. You got to go out there and be consistent. And it's boring being consistent, but it's one of the hardest things to do. And so many people don't want to do it. People talk about what they want. They talk, I want to do a business, I want to do this, I want to do that. But then when you ask them questions, you ascertain if they've actually done the work. So if someone says, I want to do a business, you say, okay, what have you done with regards to building that business? Well, I haven't done anything. Well, they say they want to do a business, but their actions say that they don't want to do a business. So, the consistency, and in a boxing context, it's doing the running, doing the road work, doing the 12-week preparation, doing the sparring, studying the opponent, keeping yourself in shape outside of camp as well as in camp. So if you turn up to camp in shape, then you can work on being in boxing shape, as opposed to coming into camp out of shape, and then it becomes like a weight loss camp. So that dedication is essential. That consistency is essential, and you have to respect it. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community, and that means I'm interested in your thoughts, I'm interested in your perspectives, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, press like, hype, and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.